Hey guys, so today we get to talk about the home front of the United States during World War II. Finally, we are at the end of Unit 10. This is our final Ed puzzle. I know this week has been very heavy with the Ed puzzles, but that's okay. Today's our last one, and then on our live day, we will discuss and cover anything from the war, the European theater, the Pacific theater, the home front, whatever it is that you need a little bit more info on, we can talk about tomorrow. Um, so please make sure that you take good notes, jot some things down. We've got our tests coming up, the AP exams coming up. We're in the home stretch, guys. So let's go ahead and get rolling on today's. Okay, now, fair warning. This one could be a little bit longer, so I'm going to try not to be too long winded. Um, but we'll see. Okay, so here we go. The United States government. So remember, contextually, what's happening in the outbreak of this war. America is in the middle of the Great Depression, or I guess on the tail end of the Great Depression, since World War II is what officially ends the Depression. And we're going to talk about why and how during today's Ed Puzzle. But because of the war that breaks out, America, our government, is going to expand and grow to the largest size that it has ever grown in the history of our nation. Okay, bigger than the New Deal. Remember, we talked about how large the government was becoming even during the New Deal. World War II trounces that. And it all starts with one law called the War Powers Act that Congress passes and Roosevelt signs, and it gives the executive, okay, the power to expand the government um, in whichever way he sees fit, okay, and this is important as we move through today's lesson to also limit individual liberties, and we're going to talk about one specific group that this is really going to target. Okay, today's that puzzle is kind of going to go from group to group to group with how the war impacts them at home. Okay, so like World War One, the government is going to ration. They're going to sell war bonds or liberty bonds. They're going to draft soldiers. Remember, during World War II, there's going to be a peacetime draft to already create soldiers in the military. Um, but one of the things that I want you to understand when we're looking at World War II, always compare it and look at the parallels between World War II and World War One. Okay, that's going to help a lot because there are a lot of similarities. However, there are some differences. This is a perfect example of the historical thinking skills that APUSH wants us to use. Okay, how are things the same, but how are they different? Continuity and change over time, if you want to call it that. Comparison, if you're looking at the two comparatively. Okay. Anyways, um, so of course, we're going to see this explosion of propaganda. We're going to see this explosion of mass production, the arsenal of democracy. We've already talked about that with the Lend-Lease program. So America, once again, just like World War One, is going to put everything into the war effort, even before we were officially fighting in the war. Okay. So let's go ahead and keep moving. Propaganda and war production. So much like World War One's Office of Public Information, in World War II, they create the Office of War Information, which directs the propaganda machine in the United States. Okay, they are trying to help the war effort in any way that they possibly can, increasing morale, getting people to enlist, raising money by selling Liberty bonds, demonizing the enemy, anything that could possibly be done through propaganda, America is going to try to do. Okay, so here are some examples. Let's catch him with his panzers down. Of course, this is Adolf Hitler, kind of poking fun at him. And of course, panzers are tanks. And basically saying, we'll be able to catch him with his pants down if we keep him firing, which means that we have to keep war production up. Okay. You give us the fire, we'll give them hell. Let's go, everybody, keep them firing. That's going to be a common trend in these propaganda posters to create a heightened production of war materials. Um, And then, of course, harkening back to the defense of liberty, Americans have always fought in the defense of liberty, and World War II is no different. Okay, so it's building up morale. Defend your country, enlist now. Uncle Sam's, taking off his jacket. He's ready to go and jump in the fight, right? And then this last one I always think is really, really cool. And those of you out there who are Marvel fans, then this will mean a little bit something to y'all too. So Captain America, you probably already know from watching the movies that Captain America originated as the ultimate soldier fighting against the Nazis. And the purpose of these comic books um, is to increase morale, to create a hero, an American hero fighting Nazi fascism, but also it's to increase the morale of the younger generation. You got to remember, if you're a kid during this time period, more than likely your dad, your older brother, your uncle, your neighbors, your whoever it is, family, friends, might be fighting in this war. And it's much easier if these younger Americans can look at their dads or their brothers as absolute heroes, Captain Americas. It's going to elevate the morale at home. Okay, so even though we like Marvel, the comic books, the movies, all that good stuff, understand that it was propaganda and it still is propaganda. And if we were live in class, we would do a little lesson on it, but just something else that Corona takes from us. All right, let's keep moving. So the War Production Board is much like the War Industries Board. The same thing. They're going to oversee the production of war material. Henry Ford's factories are going to produce with mass production in the assembly line one B-24 bomber every single hour of the day. And so during this time period, they have completely switched. They are not making cars at all. They are only making B 24 bombers. This is part of that total war that happens during World War II. Okay. Here you can see the expansive network of industry. And of course, we're going to see more growing on the West Coast because now we are fighting in the Pacific as well. Okay. You've got aircraft, ships, tanks, ordnance, which of course are, bombs and ammunition, things like that. And then, of course, the atomic bomb, which we talked about in the last Ed puzzle in Hanford and Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, and then, of course, a little bit at the University of Chicago with the nuclear reaction. Okay. Here you've got some tanks that are being mass produced, just like the B 24 bombers. Here you have the ever famous Jeep, which was, of course, invented during the war and mass produced and becomes a popular culture phenomenon that people are still obsessed with. Some of you probably drive Jeeps. And then, of course, there's something called prefabrication, which is going to allow shipbuilders of all different kinds of ships. This one here's a Liberty ship, a supply transport ship. Okay, but prefabrication means that it's put together in the shipyard, but it's the different parts are built in different areas and then brought together and then just bolted, almost like I guess Legos, if you want kind of a analogy. Okay, but anyway, so that's the War Production Board. And then, of course, we are also going to see rationing. Wartime production, like we just talked about with Henry Ford, consumer products are going to have a shortage. There's going to be a high demand for essential materials that are being withheld or used for the war effort. And so a new government bureaucracy is going to be created called the Office of Price Administration. They're going to fix prices so that prices will not go skyrocketing. Prices won't hit the floor. It will be kept at a nice equilibrium. And they're also going to distribute ration books on essential war-related materials like butter, meat, gasoline, things like that. Okay, and you're going to have one of these ration books. And my grandma had some ration books that I'm able to have now from World War II, rationing sugar, all sorts of stuff. making the pledge of the Price administration that I will not pay more than top legal fees. I will not accept ration goods without using my ration stamps. They're trying to combat the black market, which only hurts the war effort here. Okay. And then, of course, just like World War One, we are going to see victory gardens, canning your own foods, and all sorts of things like that. Okay. Very same thing that we saw in World War One. All right. Now something new, but not really new. The Bracero program. It begins in 1942, and this is migrant workers, migrant farmers. Um, I think that we touched on this a little bit with World War One, but here it's a legitimate program that's created. There is an enormous shortage of agricultural workers in America in the West, and so to meet the demand for labor, the government is going to enter into an agreement with the Mexican government for temporary migrant workers to work the agricultural lands throughout America in order to, of course, help with the war effort, help with the shortage of labor and all those sorts of things. Here you can see some members of the Bracero program that are signing up for it. They will come into America. Here's some of the housing, and they're going to work throughout America. But racism is still very prevalent in this country. Okay. And a lot of Latino men, especially young adolescents, are going to be attacked throughout the urban centers of the West, specifically places like Los Angeles, San Diego, some of the southern California cities, some of the Midwest cities like Chicago, St. Louis, some of those areas, you're going to see some violence perpetrated against young Latino men. Okay, and they're called the Zoot Suit riots. Adolescent Latin men are going to wear these suits called zoot suits. And here's an example of what they look like. Um, and zoot suits are going to come under attack by specifically white Americans. And they say that it's because it's flaunting too much fabric that could be used for the war effort. And so obviously these men are against America because they're wearing suits that use, in their logic, too much fabric. But I think that racial tension really stokes it. But one of the big issues is that it isn't just the civilian population that is going to attack and beat these young Latino men, it's also servicemen. Okay. White servicemen are going to join the attacks. It's stopped very quickly by the military, but that doesn't stop the fact that it happened in the first place. Okay. And here's a photograph from California of some sailors and some members of the army walking around with small bats or sticks or whatever you want to call those things, and that's what they attacked these young men with. So this is one of the blights, one of the negative aspects of America during this time of crisis, but it's not the only one. Okay. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and move on. So we've got the Bracero program, the Zoot Suit riots um, during this time period. So if we shift to the views of the war in America, and this is kind of before we are in the war. Okay, remember, we talked about the progression or the evolution to our entry from neutrality to cash and carry to the lend lease to declaring war. We went through a progression. Okay, and throughout the entirety of that progression, different Americans had different views about what America should do, like often happens with anything. There's going to be different viewpoints, but they're going to organize their viewpoints. So here are three different perspectives, three different levels. Okay, the first one is going to be this group called the Fight for Freedom Committee. Okay, and the Fight for Freedom Committee was exactly what it sounds like. Fight for freedom. This is the group that wanted to join the fight immediately. Stop the Nazis over there so that they will not come here. Okay, We can't just wait. We'll end up fighting at some point. So we need to stop them while they're in Europe so that they do not reach our wife and children. We have to protect our families. We have to beat down this evil demon fascist Nazi monster in Europe, okay, before they get here. So that's one immediate declaration of war, okay? Our next one is a very long one, the Committee to Defend America by Aiding the Allies. This is let's get involved, but not get involved. Okay. Support aid to Britain. We need to win by aiding our allies, be the arsenal of democracy. However, do not actually fight. Don't get involved. Let's just give them all the weapons they need to win, but we don't need to actually do anything. Okay. So you have all out war. Let's do it. We have, hey, we want the Allies to win, but we don't really want to fight. So let's just, aid the Allies. And then the third one is the America First Committee. Okay. America First, meaning isolationism. America should defend only its own shores. Only when it comes here do we need to get involved. Okay. Strict isolationists. These are the ones that are, perhaps swayed by Pearl Harbor because that is defending our own shores, even though Pearl Harbor is on Hawaii, which is not yet a state, but nonetheless, Pearl Harbor is going to change the game. But the America First Committee is how it sounds: America First. We don't need to get involved with anything that has nothing to do with us, and that's what they thought World War II was at the moment. Okay. So just keep these three different perspectives and viewpoints in your mind. All right. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on. So when the United States declares war, the military is going to need soldiers. So immediately you're going to have 6 million men volunteer for military service. I remember talking to my grandfather. One of the best college assignments that I ever had was in my I had a course named Family and Gender in World War II, and one of the assignments was to interview a man and a woman from the World War II generation, and I did my dad's parents, and I learned a lot about what happened during this time period. And my papa would, say that as soon as Pearl Harbor was attacked, everybody just left their houses. They went straight to sign up to volunteer for the military service. It's amazing to think about. But nonetheless, 6 million men immediately volunteer. Then you're going to have 10 million more who are drafted into service. So this right here is going to clear up the Great Depression. Okay, if unemployment was the problem, now you've got 16 million men that like overnight become employed. Then you have this huge demand for war products, so industry is going to increase. So this is what ends the Great Depression, guys. Okay, and here you have some different soldiers, primary source photographs of these soldiers, and they're going to be trained. A lot of these are going to be in the South. A lot of them are in the state of Georgia. Um, Back where I used to work, right there on the border of South Carolina, Fort Gordon is still there, and that's what this is right here. Okay, but nonetheless, you can also see if you look closely the different segregated units that we've got here. We've got some Japanese American soldiers, black soldiers, white soldiers, still in segregated units, but are at least able to fight for their country. And it is something, especially for the group of Japanese Americans. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. Okay. All right. So, World War II impact on these different minority groups. So, the first one is going to be American Indians. How does the war impact American Indians? And the answer is they impacted World War II much more. Okay, and you may have heard of the Code Talkers before, but it's one of the neatest things. And I may be a history nerd, but I don't care who you are. This is really cool. Okay, about 25,000 American Indians are going to serve in the United States military, and a lot of them are going to serve as these code talkers. Okay, and so let's explain what this is. Um, Remember during the Trail of Tears time period, the Indian Removal Act back during Andrew Jackson's time, we talked about the assimilation of the Cherokee. The fact that they had written an alphabet, they had a written language, that was part of their assimilation. Most American Indian tribes did not have a written alphabet, it was only spoken, which means that it is incredibly difficult to break that code. It's not a code to them, it's their language. But to somebody trying to break it without having the written word to analyze and study, it is nearly impossible. And the most well known of these code talkers are going to be the Navajo, but you're going to see American Indians from many of these native nations, including the Comanche and the Cherokee, that are going to serve in the military during the war. But the Navajo are going to play a very special role as the basically the secret code of America during World War II. It's absolutely fascinating to see. Okay. And here's just some photographs of American Indians who are fighting in World War II. Okay. So the impact on African Americans. So just very similar to World War One, we're going to see an increase of Black Americans that are going to fight in the war. We're going to see an increase of migration out of the racist South. Jim Crow is still happening in the 1940s, and so the Great Migration is going to be reinvigorated. Um, and of course, they're going to serve in both industrial capacities and military capacities. Okay, so we're going to see a huge increase of workers because of the demand for workers and the Great Migration, like I just talked about. Here is the first Great Migration during World War One, going up to these industrial cities in the north, and now they are still going up north, but they are also going to evacuate and come out here to the west because there are industrial war jobs now in the west as well. So this great migration out of the racist Jim Crow South, not just to the northern cities, but now out to the western cities as well. Okay, you're going to see a large number of Black Americans migrate to Los Angeles, Oakland. This is a very large migration of Americans. Okay, Black Americans will also serve inside the military, albeit in segregated units. They won't be segregated until Truman's executive order following the war. So they're still going to serve in segregated units. More than 1 million Black soldiers will serve. And probably the most famous that you probably already know about are the Tuskegee Airmen. Uh, Incredible pilots, combat pilots. They flew these little Mustang fighters that would escort those enormous B 24 and B 17 and B 29 bombers. They were highly decorated. They were known as the Red Tails because of the red tail on their fighter plane. And they were recognized and awarded for their incredible heroism during the war. Okay, so the Double V campaign. We have this early civil rights initiative, okay, called the Double V campaign. It stands for victory at home and victory abroad. So, victory at home against racism, against Jim Crow, against discrimination and prejudice, and of course, victory abroad against the Imperial Japanese military and fascism and the Nazis. But this is packaged together. Okay, a very very well known early civil rights activist named A. Philip Randolph is going to threaten a march on Washington in order to force President Roosevelt to help the Black community, especially when it came to racial discrimination in industrial jobs related to the war. Okay, and there is a Philip Randolph. Um, And it works. The threat works. And President Roosevelt is going to offer equal pay for black workers, equal to white workers, and he's going to create the Fair Employment Practices Commission that will kind of regulate, I guess, or look after uh, federal job, war industry job, things like that with discrimination on in the workplace. Okay. And so you can see that things do get better. This is one of the first major wins of the civil rights movement, all the way back in the 1940s, and sets the foundation for what comes later in the mid 50s through the late 60s with the civil rights movement. But remember A. Philip Randolph's name. You want to talk about contextualization? It's a good one with the civil rights movement. Okay? United we win. Okay? There's no place for racial hatred or racism in World War II. Um, I guess, unless it's committed by the government. And we'll talk about that here in a minute with the Japanese Americans. But here you've got a black man and white man working together on the same. I don't know what that is, an airplane, maybe a fighter plane, bomber, in order to win the war. Okay, they must be united. Now, the war impact on women, again, very similar to World War One, but also different. Okay, huge opportunities for women in the workforce and in the military. All right. So in the workforce, they're going to do men's jobs, okay? Industrial work. This is where we get Rosie the Riveter. 6 million women are going to enter the workforce. Some of them are going to do clerical work, but some of them are going to work on war machines like this bomber, okay? They're going to work on battleships in the West Coast. They are integral to the war effort. Okay, do the job he left behind. So there's a call for women to get involved. And unlike World War One, they don't have a mass exodus after the war. A lot of them will stay in the workforce after World War II. So this is a pivotal, transformational moment in women's history with World War II. Okay. Now, the military aspect, this is pretty new. 200,000 women are going to join the military in non combat roles. Now, this is important to understand because they're going to be allowed in the military and they're going to have rank in the military. But the jobs that they take in the military really free up men to go fight. So it's another way for men to be able to fight in the war. And so you're going to have the WACs, women in the Army Corps. You're going to have the WAVES, which are women in the Navy. You're going to have nurses that are going to a lot of the time be in harm's way. Speaking of harm's way, you're going to have war photographers that are going to be women. And then in one of the coolest things, you're going to have women in the Air Corps. And what they do is they're pilots, but they don't fly in battle or combat roles. They are going to fly the finished planes from America to the war in Europe over and over and over and over and over again. So they are very talented pilots. They're just not allowed in combat. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But women weren't allowed in combat until pretty recent in American history. But they still played incredibly vital roles to the war effort. Okay. Now, last one, World War II's impact on Japanese Americans. And so we're going to end on a downer here. Okay. Japanese Americans were treated absolutely awful by the United States government and United States citizens during this time period. And we're talking about not Japanese citizens, these are Japanese Americans. Some of them are second, third, fourth generation Americans, but they just happen to be descended from the Japanese. And so here's what happens, okay? Because of the attack on Pearl Harbor and because of the fact that we were fighting the Japanese, people feared that Japanese Americans were spies and they were helping lay the foundation for an invasion of America. It was absolute hysteria. Okay. However, the government bought in, and FDR issues an executive order 9066. Memorize that. Okay. Executive order 9066 orders 112,000 Japanese American citizens to be moved into internment camps throughout America. And let's face it, internment camps are prison camps. That's what it was. Okay, they weren't allowed to leave unless, awkwardly enough, they agree to join the military and then they get sent into Europe. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later. All right. But the Japanese in these camps, they face horrible living conditions, a lack of independence, a complete lack of rights. Um, you could have a family. You could be living in San Francisco or Los Angeles or wherever it is. Um, you could have a family, you could have a job, you could own a house, all this stuff. It's just taken away at a moment's notice, and you're sent to this prison camp. Okay, here are the prison camps. This is the exclusion area. So if you were a Japanese American and you lived in these areas, you were forcefully removed from your home and taken to one of these internment camps around the country. Okay. Um, Japanese Americans will face unwarranted and terrible racism, racial stereotypes, prejudice, attacks, violence, all sorts of things. And the legality of this order and the treatment is going to be challenged with Korematsu versus the United States. And the Supreme Court rules that it is justifiable and constitutional to do this during a time of war. So it's just another one of those things that happens where national security is placed above the rights of American citizens. And today's assignment has something directly to do with this. And I do hope that you all like it. Not today's assignment, tomorrow's, but whatever. You get what I mean. So here's some of the Japanese Americans who were being forcefully boarded onto trains to be sent to these prison camps. You could only take what you could carry. You lost everything. It's just hard to understand. Um, but it happened. Okay, and here is an example of one of those prison camps. Okay, now for some reason these ed puzzles always tend to end on a downer, but I guess that's what it is. All right. So I hope that you learned some stuff. I know that I went through it very quickly. I hope that it wasn't too long, but write some things down. Let's talk about it in our live Zoom and all that good stuff. I hope you have a good day, and I will talk to you later.